Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
How are we doing? It is 7 o'clock on the dot. All right, thank you all so much for being here. I'm so glad that it's not raining outside. We have some sunshine coming in. All right, well, he doesn't need a long introduction. He's been here before. So please give a warm welcome to Robert Buxton.
Thank you. Good evening. It's 7 o'clock right on the dot. And it is nice that it's sunny. It's been a very rainy, cloudy few weeks here. So yeah, it's good to be back at Crowsdale Village. And what I want to start with is what I've been doing a lot. I actually was doing that noodling earlier, is improvise. Because improvisation, in many ways, is kind of the foundation of what classical music is or was. In the 19th century, which is a fascinating time for music, people, they would improvise all the time in concerts, even though it's a little bit frightening to do. I wouldn't want to go back to the 19th century because there's no air conditioning, but and other things. But what we might do is, if you wouldn't mind, just give me some banal tune, anything like a children's song or something, and I'll just do it for your improvisation.
Twinkle, twinkle.
Twinkle, okay. Someone asked me to do that recently. I did that in the Rachmaninoff style, but I won't do a Rachmaninoff style. I'll do I don't know what. We'll see. Okay, Twinkle, Twinkle. Now, Twinkle, Twinkle is written by young Mozart, but I'm not going to do it in Mozart style. So. In a similar vein, that the 19th century is a big inspiration for me for many reasons. Boils down to, I guess, what you'd call performance practice, which has changed so much. In the 20th century, somebody even said, starting maybe after the Second World War, right around that time, in classical music, performance practice became more and more, I don't say rigid, but it became less about improvisatory things, less rubato, which means bending time, playing with flexibility and freedom. These were hallmarks of people like the violinists that I love and that I'm paying tribute to in this program. Violinists like Fritz Kreisler, Misha Elman, Nathan Milstein, they played in this way, and it's become more, and I'm generalizing a little bit, but what I'm playing is continuation of the same theme that I did last time, but new, different repertoire, which is that I'm completely obsessed with the violin, but it's too much trouble to learn it. My wife convinced me of that. Talked me off, I was almost going off that cliff to learn to play the violin from scratch. She said, it's not worth it. And she's right. So I'm living on plan B, which is playing arrangements of violin repertoire, which all of this is. The first I'm going to play 2 arrangements by Leopold Godowsky, who was a great pianist and a great master of this art of arrangement, which is arrangement, like improvisation, is less in vogue in the last 80 to 90 years. It's coming back, but it's a little bit less. So this piece, speaking of arrangements, it's sort of a double arrangement, because it's Godowsky's arrangement of Fritz Kreisler's arrangement of a fragment of a draft of something by Beethoven. It's a lot. This is the Rondino on a theme by Beethoven by Fritz Kreisler. Well, with everything, there's a story behind it. He wrote it in 1793. He was 23 years old only, young Beethoven. And he wanted it to be part of his wind octet, and for whatever reason he didn't finish it and didn't include it in the wind octet. So about 100 years later or so, Fritz Kreisler, the great Viennese violinist, I'm going to come back to him later, I just love Kreisler so much, he arranged it into a violin and piano piece. And it's a lovely piece. It's early Beethoven. It's young Beethoven. And to say it more clearly, this Beethoven before the demons of his life took over, mainly from deafness. And that influences music so much. It became darker, it became more storm and stress almost. So this is like Beethoven with a clean slate. It's a green Beethoven, if you will. So here it is, the Rondino on a theme by Beethoven, by Kreisler, arranged by Godowsky. Thank you. Now, another arrangement of Godowski's. This is from Georges Bizet. This is the Adagietto from L'Arlésienne, Suite Number 1, which is incidental music. Incidental music means that it's music, background music for a play. You have incidental music for movies and TV too, it's the same thing. Different context maybe, but the play, L'Arlésienne, it means a woman from Arles, which is a city in Provence. Van Gogh lived there at one point. And it's by Alphonse Daudet, great French writer. So Bizet, we mostly remember him for Carmen, which is the great Spanish themed opera. And sadly, Bizet didn't live all that long. His life was not that long, but he did write a number of other pieces, including these L'Arlésienne suites, which this is sort of a fragment from. He wrote a symphony in C and lots of beautiful music, which is worth listening to, really. To me, it just strikes me as very French. And I'm hesitant or wary about, saying that music sounds like a certain nationality or something, but to me, it's the language a little bit. Beethoven obviously was from Bonn. He was a German speaker, and there's an articulation to his music that sounds to me like the German language. Das ist sehr gut. It has a certain crispness to it. But French, when you hear French spoken, you have to sort of speak it like you have cotton candy in your mouth. Southerners sometimes do the same thing, where they sort of talk, certain words become morphological, and c'est la même chose en français. You sort of, and the music has that. I think the articulation, the phrasing is different. You'll hear it. It's like a Renoir painting. There's a little fuzziness to it. I know this is not technically, it's not Impressionism, but late 19th century romantic, but still, you'll see what I mean, I think, or hear it rather. Do one more short piece like this, mellow. Actually, most of this today is going to be short pieces. And I can't decide if I played this last time I was here. But if so, this is the only one I'm repeating from last time. I was here back in March, early March. I may have done this. This is the Raff Cavatina. Have you ever heard the name Raff, R-A-F-F? Swiss composer. Anybody? You haven't? Really? Well, no, I'm kidding. No, I hadn't heard of him either until until I learned this and found out about his music through the violin. so Switzerland, of course, the country where they speak everything. He was Swiss German. So this piece, well, Raff he lived in the late 19th century, and he's somewhat overlooked today. We don't really hear much of his music. Like, that's why we hadn't really heard of him. He has wonderful symphonies, and I don't understand why he's not remembered. There are some cases where there's a composer we don't play their music now, and you can sort of hear why. I don't mean to be putting anyone down, but with Raff, it doesn't really make sense. Maybe he's old-fashioned in a way. He wears his heart on his sleeve in an old-fashioned way, but I love that. And this piece, the cavatina, is just absolutely beautiful. And cavatina means short song. So it's coming from vocal music. I mean, in a way, it all comes from vocal music. One of the things I love about the violin, as opposed to the piano, is the violin or the cello can sound more like a human voice. And as pianists, our goal is to do that as much as we can. So with this strange instrument of a box with strings and hammers, which I love very much, don't get me wrong. Anyway, this is the cavatina by Raff. This is going to be sort of the main course of today, which is the first set of Paganini studies arranged by Robert Schumann. These are somewhat eclipsed by Franz Liszt's Paganini arrangements, but they're no less, great. They're just, I played those last year. This is part of the violin thing. A violin program, it's not complete without Paganini. So in the 1830s, both Liszt and Schumann, they did their Paganini arrangements because they were just so under the spell of Paganini and who he was, what he was. In the words of Ivry Gitlis, a great violinist, he said that Paganini was like the Big Bang in music because his style just comes out of nowhere. It's not rooted really in any tradition so much. And he was a wild man. Paganini, the way he lived his life, he was like a modern-day rock star. Really no less than that. Think of somebody like a Jimi Hendrix or somebody. He was just this, and some people thought he was possessed even. Some people believed he was possessed. He also, even his look was very unusual. Now we know he had Marfan's syndrome, which apparently Rachmaninoff had as well, contributing to sort of elongated facial features and all this. I mean, I'm not in the medical field, but that's, now we know that. In those days, they just said, oh, he looks possessed. That's not very nice. That's another thing I don't like about the 19th century. So, Schumann, he, like Liszt, I think all the Romantics, they idolized Paganini because they saw the seeds of themselves, of their future styles in him. Maybe the previous generations thought Paganini was this crazy guy, but the Romantics, there's so many composers who used Paganini as the vantage or the starting point for their compositions. I mean, much later, it was Brahms who did, I'm working on the Rachmaninoff, working on that too. I mean, I should cover all the Paganini music during this violin thing. So, yeah, this is like the art of literary translation, in that it's not just, Schumann's not copying what Paganini did. Although I have to say, Schumann's arrangements are closer to the original Paganini than Liszt's. Liszt adds a lot more, flamboyant stuff. But nevertheless, I mean, Schumann, this is music, these caprices by Paganini. It's music for solo unaccompanied violin. So obviously he has to add chords, he has to add things to make it into piano music. And so this point about translation, when I read a translation of somebody, I feel the style of the translator too. It's inevitable. I feel like this feels like Schumann when I play. It feels like Schumann in the hands, and it's Schumann in the way it sounds, but it's Paganini, right? Schumann, I have to mention, he was, what a genius he was. He lived a very troubled life. He was plagued with bipolar disorder, and but this is a very young Schumann. This is one of his first big composition projects. And I think he learned, I think he found himself, like Liszt did, he found himself through arranging, almost copying, like painters will take an older master and they'll copy. You see them in the museums, that's how they learn the craft. Bach damaged his eyesight because he would stay up all night by candlelight transcribing the concertos of Vivaldi and Marcello for organ or piano, or harpsichord rather. So I'll leave you with a quote before we get into the pieces. Rossini, another great Romantic composer, Rossini said, and Rossini, unlike Schumann, he lived a life without really any drama or hardship, really. Rare for a classical composer. And Rossini said that there were only 2 times in his life when he cried. The first time was when he heard Paganini play the violin, so there. The second time was when his favorite pasta dish fell over a rowboat into a lake. Rossini was a great cook. Even there's a cookbook by Rossini. What a great guy. So anyway, this is Paganini Schumann. You're going to hear in this first one why he was so controversial at the time. I think for good reason. So you have two kinds of pieces. I mean, there are many kinds, but there are two types of things that you can have. You can have like Liszt's arrangements of Paganini, for instance. It's a little shop talk secret I'm going to tell you. I love Liszt. Obviously, he was a genius and he's a great composer. But Liszt writes for the piano, just purely physically speaking. He writes for the piano in a way that it fits the hands on the glove. In other words, it sounds much harder than it is. Doesn't mean it's not hard, but oftentimes Liszt is like that. So you have that, and then you have music that doesn't sound difficult at all, but it's extremely difficult to play, like that Bizet piece I played, arranged by Godowsky, because it sounds very mellow, but Godowsky, who was technically, he was crazy as a pianist. Godowsky, who I started with, he took Chopin's etudes, and he decided that they weren't hard enough, so he souped them up. And in some cases put two etudes, one in the left hand, another in the right hand, two different etudes, merged them together. Crazy stuff. So the Bizet piece is one of the hardest pieces I've ever played. It didn't sound it right, but
he does this thing, it's like these chords.
It's just awkward, but it doesn't sound hard. Getting to the point about Schumann. Then you have something like the Schumann Paganini, which sounds difficult, and they are awkward and difficult to play. So it's the worst of both worlds. But the music is just so glorious. So the next one I'm going to do is called La Chasse, which Liszt incidentally arranged too, in a very, very different arrangement. La Chasse means hunt, and it's imitating the sound of horn calls. That's what they used in those days for hunting. It's not like what you have now. You go to Walmart, get a duck whistle for $2. They didn't have that in those days. Whenever you hear that in classical music, or something that could be slower, like that's imitating horn calls. If it's with an orchestra, French horns will literally play that material. There's a Mozart sonata, F major, this one.
There's a part.
That's the horn calls. And it's a symbol of the countryside. Not to go too deep into this, but the countryside for the Romantics, for Beethoven, Paganini, and everyone after, the countryside and nature was this obsession for the Romantics. And I read this quote somewhere, someone said, I think it was a scholar, somebody said that for the Romantics, nature, or back to nature, it was a reaction against industrialization, which was what was going on at that time, early 19th century, and maybe the political turmoil at that time as well. We had the American Revolution, French Revolution, the monarchies were falling. So it was quite a time in history. So here is La Chasse, the hunt, Paganini Schumann. this theory, and it's not backed up by any evidence, but when I was in Italy, I felt like that music, the previous two pieces. And I realized it was because the food is so, the coffee is so good and so cheap in Italy, so is the food. So I was overly caffeinated all the time. So I have a feeling maybe Paganini was overly caffeinated, and that's why his style was. There might be some truth to that, because I was reading recently about the rise of cafe culture in the 18th century. Because before that, the only drink that was really safe to drink was beer or wine, which that's great, but if that's all you're drinking, you might not have a lot of energy for big ideas. Well, I don't know, but apparently the philosophes in the 18th century, the French philosophers, it was kind of coming out of the cafe culture. They're drinking coffee, they perk up, and they have some ideas and talk. Maybe Paganini was like that, but don't quote me on that, because I don't know. But if that's the case, this next one is Paganini before he's had his morning coffee, or his espresso, And I love the name Paganini. I was telling someone, I'm trying to learn a few languages poorly. That's how I put it. If I can speak several languages poorly, I'll be happy. That's just as far as I think I can get. And Italian is wonderful, and people in Italy are wonderful about it. Because if you go to France, they don't like it if you don't speak French, but if you try, they hate you even more, I've noticed. At least in Paris, yeah. But in Italy, you can go with just 2 or 3 words, and people, they'll encourage you. They love it when you stumble. So if you're on the train in Italy, you just say Paganini, It sounds like you're speaking. You say Paganini, La Scala, and you're set. Okay, so here's the next one. This one is very pastoral, like the Beethoven. And it's very calm, it's very meditative, and it shows that Paganini was not only a showman. It has this feature, which the last one had. Did you notice these chords? That's how the violin would have to do chords, like roll the chords, right? But that's also guitar-like. And Paganini was a virtuoso guitarist. He wrote lots of guitar music. You see, he really was Jimi Hendrix, wasn't he? And this piece has that. You hear the strumming, guitar strumming, you hear it. So here's the next one. Next, caprice. And I love the word caprice. It means capricious. And that's what these really are. They're capricious in their character. Sorry for the many punctuations or applause, because these are short, short and sweet and to the point. The next one has a nickname also. The nickname is the Devil's Laugh. Speaking of, I've told you that, conspiracy theory people had at the time that he was possessed. I don't know if he gave it that title, but maybe he was playing into that. So it does sound like laughter here at the beginning. It sounds like a sort of menacing laugh. There are many types of laughs. This is, to me, it's somewhere in between a haughty, stuck-up laugh and a slightly evil laugh. It's not a gutsy laugh. It's sort of it's like that kind of laugh. And the character of this is very interesting because it's like that, giggly, but sort of a little bit sardonic, with a little bit of a wry smile to it, slightly menacing. And then it erupts in like anger in the middle. And then at the end, it's like nothing happened and it's just back to normal. I know one of my friends has a pet dog like that. They're just like going about their business, and then the wind blows, or they lose it with anger, and then they go right back. And I think Paganini, please forgive me for the bad pun, but I think he was high-strung, second time, right? So you'll hear it in this. Yeah, that's called a dad joke. When you become a dad, everything becomes, apparent. I did another one. Okay, so here it is. Couple more of these Paganinis, then we're getting towards the end of this set, which, as I said, this is the steak and potatoes for tonight, the main focus. The next one has a similar trajectory. It starts out humorous, and then it goes berserk, and then it goes right back. And there's a word in Italian, scherzo or scherzando, which literally means joke, but it's not necessarily the sort of joke that you'd laugh out loud at. For example, Chopin has four famous scherzi. Here's the beginning of the second one, and please tell me what's funny about it, because I really don't know. So where's the joke? It has a jump scare, for sure. It starts out, quiet, and like any good horror movie, there's the suspense, and then the skeleton jumps out of the closet and you scream. But is it funny, really? It's a type of humor that's more like sarcastic wit, maybe. Caustic wit. I think that's what it is. I think that Paganini has that in every note that he writes. There's this wit in there, and that's this piece. And I want to offer a imaginary scenario for this next one and the previous piece. Maybe you've had an experience like this. So imagine you're talking to somebody in a restaurant. Maybe you don't know them too well. And you're having a very polite, nice conversation. They're talking and they're saying, you're giggling, and it's very nice. And the waiter or waitress makes a tiny mistake in the order, and they just flip out with rage, screaming and yelling. And then the anger subsides, goes away like nothing. And then back. I even think of some scenes in like cartoons, because it's the word would be grotesque. It's such an extreme change, and I think that that's this piece and the previous one, if you want to think of it that way. So here is the next one. You hear the horn calls too, the last one. And you'll hear it in here as well. So here's the next Paganini. The next one, and the final of this set, Schumann wrote 2 sets of Paganini studies, and then my homework for the next month or so is to learn the next one. This last piece of this set is different from all the others, in the sense that, well, to put it simply, In all the others, Schumann rather, takes the solo violin caprice, he puts it pretty much in the right hand of the piano. And he adds really what's accompaniment-like things in the left hand. That's just too big of a generalization. But the caprice, the original music of the caprices of Paganini, you hear them prominently in all of those. And in that sense, these arrangements are close to the originals. But this last one, it just sounds like a piece by Schumann, because the way he does the arrangement is different. He puts the caprice, which is a minor, G minor is a dark caprice, but he puts it in the left hand, and he makes his own sort of theme in the right hand. So the caprice is here. It's there, and then in the right hand, which is a very Schumann-esque idea. And so this piece sounds purely like Schumann to me. It sounds like something straight out of Kreisleriana, or another big composition, David's Bunlotanz or something. So that's just proof of this story, that arrangement or copying someone else, you learn your style that way. And I hear all of the darkness and the genius and the wildness of Schumann. It just sounds like a Schumann piece, purely. So here is the last Paganini caprice arranged by Schumann. Now I'm going to play something much lighter, because I think we need it. I mean, especially that last one it's quite heavy. And even if Paganini has this sense of humor, it's nothing like the sense of humor that's truly lighthearted of Fritz Kreisler. You know, Paganini is more of a menacing sense of humor. Fritz Kreisler, I'd say this, if you're ever having a gloomy day, a bad day, and you want to cheer up a little bit, listen to Fritz Kreisler. He will make you smile. His just one note from his violin, even on those old recordings, it's like sunshine. And he was that kind of person, you know. He was always smiling, and he was just a very positive person, a great soul. And he was very Viennese. I think I'll tell you this old 19th century joke. I'm telling it all the time now. It's, what's the difference between Berlin and Vienna, or to say that there was no Germany in the 19th century early, but what's the difference between German culture and Austrian culture? Let's just say it that way. And the joke goes like this: in Berlin or Hamburg, things are very serious, but there's hope. That's Beethoven. Beethoven's music is from Bonn. In Austria and Vienna, things are not so serious, but there's no hope. That's the difference. And I think of Schubert, who was native Viennese, one of my favorite composers, and you know this famous serenade stanchion by Schubert. It's obviously a very sad piece, but it has a lightness to it, you know. When Beethoven is sad, he's sad, you know. When Schubert is sad, it's a little bit, it's like, it's got half a smile to it. You know, he wrote that serenade when he was dying at the age of 31. But it has this lilt to it, this lightness. Anyway, I'm reading all these things because we're taking a small family trip to Austria. We have friends that live there. And unfortunately, they don't live near Vienna. So I don't think I'm going to get to Vienna this time, but it's closer to Switzerland. But hey, maybe I'll see somewhere where Raff lived. Yeah. So this piece, although it is very Viennese in its lightness and its sparkle, Fritz Kreisler, it's inspired by traditional Chinese music too. So it's truly international. The story is that Fritz Kreisler, I assume he was touring in the U.S. at this time, because he eventually settled in this country. He was Jewish, and when the rise of fascism and anti-Semitism came about, fortunately he came here and had a great career as a performer. And sorry, I don't like to use the word career sometimes for music, but anyway, the story is that Kreisler was traveling through San Francisco in 1910, and he heard traditional Chinese music being played, Chinese classical music. And he was so inspired by it that he wrote this piece. But he said that he wasn't trying to copy it. He was trying to just put some of his impression of hearing that music into this piece. And, you know, this is not the only time that this has happened in the early 20th century, late 19th century. Debussy had this almost overwhelming experience when he heard Balinese gamelan music at the Paris World's Fair in 1880. I'm forgetting the exact date, I would fail music history, but that experience informed so much of what he did later. So anyway, I feel like I talked too much, but here is the Kreisler. It's called Tambourin Chinois, which means Chinese drum. to close with a couple Southern gospel songs. I won't sing, I can't. But I play a lot of gospel, and forgive me if I told you this in the same silly way last time, but I tell people this, my parents are both immigrants. And my mother is an immigrant from the Soviet Union. They live in Chapel Hill now. I grew up in New Jersey, of all places, right? So, but my mother's from the Soviet Union, and this love of classical music is through her and through my late uncle or brother, Boris, who used to listen to this music all the time. And my dad is also an immigrant, but he's from Southern Virginia. So that's where the love of Southern gospel comes in, country music and all that, because all the time that I was learning classical growing up, my dad would always come to me and sort of nudge me and say, when are you going to play some real music? And this is in New Jersey, of all places, right? So it's quite a contrast. So here's a song that's, I don't know if you call this Southern gospel, I don't know what you call it. It's called Bless This House, O Lord, We Pray. You've probably heard it. It's beautiful. And it's not really sung in churches because it's something to sing at home. It's blessing a home. And well, this is a home, so let's do it here. Why not? I think this music fits the occasion. There's a great recording, several great recordings of Mahalia Jackson singing, and also Perry Como sang it very well. So here it is. I'm going to close with a real quick. This is my dad's music. This is what he plays and sings. This is the Unclouded Day, which we have sort of today, and I'm going to play it in a very old-timey Southern country gospel style, upbeat, to close. And somebody once told me it sounds Baptist-costal, And I've never heard that word before. But apparently, I know this is a Methodist retirement, but I guess this is Baptist-Costal and stuff. Well, that's all, folks. Thank you very much for having me, and I'll see you soon. Take care.
No, thank you very much. Oh, so good music. Oh, well, my dad's both brothers, my uncles are Methodist pastors, so, but yeah, I think it sounded good. It sounded a little more Pentecostal than Baptist, I think, but I don't know. I'll appreciate it. Oh yeah, I'll be having some different materials, so keep it fresh. Take care. Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's an awful here with our two little ones. 3 and 5. Yep. I gave it a couple I just do my best. I have to turn this thing up.